I'm Gwyn, and I co-chair the training forum and have done for about 14 years now, I think. Now, today's subject is one very close to my heart, which is about psychological safety. But more than just what is psychological safety, it's about how it can really help you have a much more innovative team. Not to put too fine a point on it, if people feel able to speak, they're much more likely to say some ideas. I'm really grateful to Helen Joy today, who's a new tutor to us at the Training Forum. The Training Forum's main purpose is to introduce you to new speakers, coaches, ideas, new trainers. And I think we've got a real goodie here in Helen, because not only did she work for many, many years doing recruitment and training at Reed, but she is an accomplished coach, trainer, and personal speaker. And one of the areas that she really looks at very closely is how to get the most out of your middle managers. And you can see exactly where psychological safety comes into play there. The way we're going to do this is that we're recording the session. There will be polls and interactivity, and any questions that you've got, please just put them in the chat and we'll try and make sure that we get a chance to answer them. We're also going to do one breakout room, possibly towards the end. So thank you very much, Helen, for agreeing to come today.
Thank you so much for asking me, Gwyn, and thank you for having me on. As you mentioned, yeah, this is a subject that is so close to my heart. I'm so passionate about this myself. I did my work experience last century. I've got the blur up really high on my Zoom, so you probably wouldn't believe that in the 80s I did my work experience at somewhere called McCann, Manchester, that some of you may actually be familiar with. It was actually, I think, McCann Erickson back in the day, in their lovely offices in Prestbury. And I love Mad Men. I unfortunately didn't get to go into advertising, but they were an amazing place to work. And then Mad Men came along, and I decided that if I'd have been born 20 years earlier, I would have been Peggy Olson. I wish, but there you go. I love adverts. I love the creativity, and especially this time of year as well. This is when all those really creative adverts start coming in, and you go from the cheese factor, from kind of you know, your mild Edam up to your Stiltons, and it's absolutely wonderful to see that. So it's lovely to speak to the people who create those today. So thank you. I've been managing, as Gwyn said, managers for over 20 years now, which is quite scary. I'm not an academic. This is not going to be an hour filled with statistics and details. There are links to resources in the final slide, which you can all have after. But this is very much around, I work in businesses alongside leadership to actually make sure that managers have the skills, knowledge, and confidence to create teams that can actually thrive. So this is very much about the practicalities of psychological safety and innovation and how they meet. I work alongside marketing companies and a couple of SEO agencies, and I really like engagement. So you don't want to listen to me just talk for 55 minutes. So if you have got questions, please pop them in the chat, and Gwyn will be monitoring that. So if there's anything that pops up at the beginning, or as we go through, we'll pick them up as we go. Otherwise, I have hopefully left some time for Q&A at the end, depending on how much engagement we get. So to start that right at the very beginning, I'm going to do a quick poll and then a couple of questions just to establish a poll around how confident are you in your knowledge of what psychological safety actually is. So if Irina could pop that poll up, that would be amazing. Doesn't matter if there's no right or wrong, there's no judgment. It's just an idea of how confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10 that you know what psychological safety is. Excellent. So what's great to see, I don't know if that pops up there, what you can see there then is actually already there is some knowledge about psychological safety, which is absolutely fantastic, and quite high knowledge of that as well, which again makes me so happy. I've been talking about this subject for 20 years, which is, as I say, is quite scary. But if I'd have asked that question 20 years ago, that would have been tipped completely the other way, I suspect. So that is absolutely brilliant to see at this point. So just a couple of questions. Again, just to kind of see in terms of the detail around that. So Irene, if we could have the next question, please. And so which US organization undertook Project Aristotle in 2012 to study team performance? So that then is, you can all see the results there, can't you? That's fantastic. Brilliant. So yeah, as you can see, it was in fact Google, very, very famous study that was probably the single biggest factor for bringing psychological safety as a concept out into the broader, wider world, out of the rooms of learning and development practitioners who were at that point banging on about how important it was. And thankfully, Google brought that into the mainstream. Fantastic. So now the next question, and the last question at this point is, what percentage of people, so if we could go for the next question, please. What percentage of people feel psychologically safe at work? What we've got there is 34% got that right. It's actually 47% of people. And this was a survey that was done by, as I said, did I mention at the beginning, as I say, I'm very high I yellow in the insights disc world, very little green in there. So as I say, the links are on the last screen. But yeah, so it's 47% of people. Now, again, that is quite a bit higher than it has been. If you think about how that ties in, I don't know if you've seen any of the Gallup polls around how engaged people are in the workplace, which is on average in Europe is about 13%. It's great to see that is such a high percentage of people that actually do feel psychologically safe. So maybe people who may not be fully engaged in the workplace, but they are actually feeling psychologically safe there, which is fantastic. Brilliant. So who's happy to share in the chat? Is anybody comfortable to share in the chat what they think the definition of psychological safety is in the workplace? What does psychological safety mean? No negative reactions or consequences to your contributions. Absolutely fantastic. That there is, Sue, yeah, confident and happy, safe and comfortable, safe and authentic. Absolutely brilliant. They're flying through now, aren't they? That's amazing. Confidence to express yourself, taking risks, freedom from failure, fear of failure, not freedom from failure, because we will never have absolute freedom from failure. Absolutely brilliant. It's great to see so many people actually already recognize and understand what that looks like. So Amy Edmondson, who is kind of in some respects the queen of psychological safety, she's the person again who's been really, really key in terms of bringing that into the mainstream. Her definition is a shared belief held by members of a team that it's okay to take risks, to express themselves and their ideas and concerns, and to speak up with questions and admit mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. And that is the fundamental principle that psychological safety, that means that we are able to say things. We know that if things go wrong, it actually doesn't matter. It's not a problem at all. Anybody familiar with the research that kind of came before that, which was, you may or may not be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 5 stages that he felt that we went through in order to come to self-actualization, which is that ability to kind of produce in ourselves the development and ongoing awareness of what's going on around us in the world. So physiological needs and safety needs are the very, very foundation and the basis. Those are the food, water, shelter, safety, making sure that we know that we are physically safe from harm. So those are our physical needs. And once those are met, which in most countries, in particularly the Western world, those safety needs are met on a fairly regular basis. The psychological needs are the belonging and love and the self-esteem. So it's the relationships, it's the friendships, It's that ability to use our voice and be confident enough to speak up. And those build, and that's where that sense of psychological safety comes, when people have that feeling of self-esteem and the belonging and love. When psychological safety is high, we take much more ownership, we put more discretionary effort in, and we are open to learning more, and we become better at problem solving. We're much more open to those things. When it's low, we self-censor, we manage those risks internally, we don't share when we're concerned about things, we avoid exposure, and we're very, very, very much focused on self-preservation. So when you're in those organizations where that is the situation, you can recognize that by identifying how open people are to sharing ideas, thoughts, fears, those types of things. As I mentioned, Project Aristotle, which Google undertook in 2012, brought psychological safety into the mainstream, really. And what they did is, it was a study of team effectiveness. What they wanted to do was identify what it was that made their most successful teams successful. And they went through so many different ideas and different, they looked at, was it the makeup of the team, was it the backgrounds of the people in the teams, was it the educational level within the teams? And what they actually identified was that the teams that were most successful tended also to be the ones that failed the most. And that took them a while to kind of grasp how that could possibly be, and how could you be so successful but continually fail. And what they actually, and that was the driver that brought them to the recognition of the psychological safety, because all of the research that has gone into identifying psychological safety has identified that the fear of failure is, if not completely removed, but it's minimized. Because when people feel that they can share ideas, no matter how creative, innovative, left field that they are, without fear of being judged for actually coming up with those ideas, that is where you then have that ability to fail, and to fail successfully. Nobody's suggesting that you want to fail on the same issue constantly, but it's that failure of creativity and innovation. There's a chap called Timothy Clark who built on the work of Amy Edmondson and the other pioneers around psychological safety. And what he came up with is the idea that there are 4 levels of psychological safety. And those 4 levels are inclusion safety, which is where people feel safe and that they belong within that team, that they are accepted and valued for who they are, and they are able to be who they are, and they feel wanted and appreciated in that environment. The second stage is what's called learner safety, and this is where that ability to fail comes in. It's where people are able to ask questions, people feel safe to say that they don't know something and that they need to learn something. They'll admit when those small mistakes happen, and they will actively ask for help. Level 3 is what's called contributor safety. And again, people feel safe to contribute their ideas, and that they know there'll be no embarrassment or ridicule around that. And it can be quite challenging to get people to get to this level of contributor safety, because it really is an element where people can't feel vulnerable, or they feel vulnerable, but they know that they're safe within that vulnerability as well. And then challenger safety, which is the sort of higher level of that, is around people's ability to question at whatever level, so that they are able to identify that very much the questions of, well, why do we do that? What's the purpose? Have we thought about doing things differently? So pushing back against this is how we do things here. And obviously within advertising, you're in an environment and an industry where that challenging has got to always be able to be quite high, because otherwise you won't get the innovation that you need in order to continue to be at the top of your industry. Has anybody come across those 4 levels before? Has anybody heard of the different levels? Anybody aware of those? If you have, you could just drop in the chat that you've come across them. That would be fantastic. Okay, so there is a link to, or there isn't a link, but the details of the book that comes from is actually in the final thing. So is everybody happy with those? Does everybody kind of understand what those 4 different levels mean? Because what I'd like to do is a quick poll. Brilliant. So yeah, Georgie, yeah, haven't heard of the levels, but heard the concept. So yeah, it's those 4 different stages. What I'd like to do, Irina, if we could, is bring the poll up. And this is a you've got multiple options here. And what I'd like you to do is, on the basis of those 4 descriptions, and they're pretty self-explanatory in terms of the titles, is just within that poll, just click on each of the levels that you think that you have in your organization at the moment. Let's wait for that to... So what is absolutely fantastic to see there is how many get up to that level of challenger safety, but that inclusion safety, so 94%, that is absolutely fantastic. And then the learner and the contributor, it's really hard to say that word, I need to put my teeth in, contributor safety, at 82%, again, is really, really, really good to see, which is fantastic. So, and doesn't surprise me massively, given the creativity that you work in and around, because you need to be able to contribute, you need to be able to have everybody's viewpoints brought into there. The levels aren't necessarily linear. Timothy Clark's research or his model is that they build on each other, and that you have to have the inclusion safety in order to have for people to feel that they're able to admit mistakes, and then you've got to be able to be open to learning in order to contribute. I've read a number of papers and things that kind of question that, and that talk about that you can potentially go up and down, that you can potentially have learner safety but not necessarily inclusion safety. I haven't done enough depth of detail of research around that to kind of know which of those is true, but I think it's important to recognize how you feel, and how the people around you might feel around, do they feel included? Do they feel that they're able to turn up to work as their full selves? Do they feel that they can admit mistakes? Do they feel that they can voice their opinion? And we'll talk briefly in a second about how you can measure some of those. But the facts are that when people feel safe to contribute and to challenge, that is when you are going to get much more in the way of ideas, in the way of creativity, and a more diverse viewpoint being brought into every single thing that you do. It does come from the top, in terms of leaders have to model the behaviors that they want to see. They have to show all of these themselves, but also as individuals, we've got to take responsibility for making sure that we do actually push ourselves a little bit into those different zones as well. So if we think about what those levels are, I'm so sorry, I'm just going to get rid of that off my screen. Brilliant. Yes, Sandy, they're definitely an observable difference for those different things, and whether people do feel comfortable to speak up or the people who don't. There are different ways of measuring, I'm just going to my psychological safety. You can do surveys. On the final slide, there is a link that takes you into a website which is purely about psychological safety, and they've got surveys that you can actually download from their website for free. And you can just, there's in Amy Edmondson's book, The Fearless Organization, she has 7 questions that you can ask of your people. that will actually give you a really, really good idea about what those levels of psychological safety are within your organization. 4 are positive statements and 3 are negative statements. So how she goes into detail of how to measure those. And I'm happy to have a chat with anybody afterwards. I'll pop a Calendly link in if anybody wants to have a chat, to have a half-hour chat to talk through how she does that. You can also do interviews and focus groups, so you can go and actually talk to people and ask those questions on a face-to-face level, because sometimes people are much more open. Depending on the organisation, sometimes people are more open on an anonymous survey, sometimes they may be more open in a focus group. You can also do that observation, just watching and observing how people do and how they behave in certain circumstances. What I would highly recommend you do after this, and next time you're in a meeting where you are looking for creativity, where you've got a few people in a room, is just do some observations. So just think about those 4 levels that we talked about and observe the people in that room and see who's admitting when they don't know something, who's looking like they feel included. Is everybody encouraged to participate? Does everybody participate? Who's happy to admit when they don't know something? Who's happy to say, I'm not sure, could somebody help me with this? Who's happy to contribute? Who's happy to bring up new ideas? And who pushes back, if anybody? And that will give you just a real high level view of, within that group, how many of those people actually are at what level. But you can also do psychological safety assessments. There are companies that will do that for you. I don't, but there are businesses that will go out there and will come in and will do a real thorough job for you of actually looking at what that's like, and they'll help you then work on how you build that within your business as well, if that's a route that you want to go down. Okay, so that's psychological safety. Hopefully everybody's comfortable with that. It's always really hard when you can't see people's faces, so you can't tell if you're hitting the spot or not. I think there's if anybody's got any questions at this point. Thank you, Sandy. That's lovely. It makes it so much easier for me when I can probably see my face is just lit up now. I'm like, oh, a face. Wonderful. If anybody's got any comments or questions or anything, yes, I can see Gwyn as well. Hello, thank you. Brilliant. Any questions at all on that? If I'll just give you kind of 10-15 seconds or so to pop any questions in. If not, we will then go on to the next stage. Okay, brilliant. Okay, fabulous. I'm going to plow on because I'm very conscious of time. How did that half hour go already? I don't know how it happens. Okay, so what is innovation? What I'd really, really appreciate you doing at the moment is, could you just drop me a quick, whether it's a line or a phrase or a sentence, what does innovation mean in your business? Or what does innovation look like in your business? Brilliant. Forward thinking, fresh ideas, industry leading ideas, absolutely. Totally new way of doing something, new bold ideas. Fantastic. Change for the better, do things differently, developing more products and processes that move. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, proper fastest finger first there. That's really speedy. You can tell a lot of you spend a lot of time on keyboards, which is great. Yeah, new solutions to old and new problems as well. Positive progress, absolutely brilliant. Thinking outside the box, fabulous. Brilliant, thank you. I've got a couple of definitions for you here, which are, so the Oxford Dictionary, the action or process of innovating a new method, idea or product, which is exactly what you guys said. And according to McKinsey, systematic practice of developing and marketing breakthrough products and services for adoption by customers, which I think applies probably more into your industry as well, in that it's systematic, because you are continually having to look at those breakthrough. It might not necessarily be the products and for your services, but it's how you get those services in front of your customers. and how in front of your customers almost. It's that next stage ahead. So it's being the innovative people, because when you're pitching against each other, sometimes some clients, it's very much around the new, the innovative, the shiny. Those are the clients that want that sort of thing, as opposed to the proven track record, traditional ways of doing things. But even if you're not working with clients that want the new innovative thing, having innovative ways of looking at how do you continue to do the traditional things is really important. But it's very much, as you say, it's about that embracing new ideas and perspectives. Before we go on to the next, in fact, no, I'm going to do the next one. So again, anybody familiar with Matthew Syed's Rebel Ideas? No. Oh, this is fabulous. If you haven't read this book, again, there's a link to this at the end. It's a great book. And what he's talking about is diversity of thought. And Gwyn, I found something you didn't know. I'm so excited. So excited. This book's great and it's really easy to read. He uses loads of stories about different businesses. And what his research has shown is that when you've got, we tend to recruit and employ and build teams of people that are very similar to us. And what that means is that cognitively, those teams think in very, very similar ways. So and these are his depictions of those. And so you can see, so if the rectangle is all the ideas and all the creativity, when we recruit people similar to us, similar educational backgrounds, so on and so forth, we tend to think in similar ways. So we tend to come at things from the same perspective. And his whole book is about how do we bring diversity of thought into teams. And what he identified was if you get random cognitively diverse teams, what you get is lots of different ideas, but there tends not to, there's still lots of gaps in that whole world of ideas that aren't actually being met. If you curate a cognitively diverse team, and part of that will be around the recruitment of who you bring into your organization, but the other half of it is how much you enable them to think more broadly and how you encourage them to think differently. You actually then get people coming from so many different perspectives and so many different ways that you can then just encompass so many more ideas, and you're kind of going to get closer to that whole world of all the ideas that are out there as well. So that's where you're going to get more innovation, because you're covering more of those things. So you can create that diversity by making sure that you've got as much psychological safety as possible, and thinking about Timothy Clark's 4 levels. When you've got that challenger safety, that's extending out people's freedom to think and ability to broaden that. There's one last poll just before we go kind of into the next bit, and this is just about the size of your organization, because what I'd really like to ask you is, do you think the size of your organization impacts on your ability to be creative and innovative? Because there's pros and cons for both of those, but it'd just be really interesting to, if we could pop that final poll up, and that's just kind of what's the size of your organization. So how many people, how many employees do you have in your organization? Okay, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So we're kind of very much predominantly in the SME site there. Brilliant. So yeah, you've got predominantly bulk of people within that sort of 16 to 200 people. Those of you that work in small organizations, if you've worked in large organizations as well, it would be really, really interesting to get your comments on whether it is easier to be innovative in a small organization or in a large organization? Or if you haven't, if you're still, you know, you've only worked in small ones or in big ones, how easy is it to be creative and innovative? So brilliant, we've got one there, say depends on how you share learnings. Be really interested to hear a bit more about that, Sandy. Actually, if you've got a minute to just pop a little bit more in there, would be great. Thank you. Okay, Marina, a large organization, about the same. Yeah, it depends on the culture. Small, yeah. Easier and large. Okay, yeah, only works in small, but could be larger. Yeah. So just wait to see how fast Sandy can type. Yeah, small. Yeah, very much around the silos. Sorry, Sandy. Yeah, I think there, Georgia, I don't have any kind of stats for this, but I've worked in both really small organizations and really large organizations. And when I was in recruitment, I worked across a whole range of them. And it's very much around those silos. I think I agree with Gwyn, is that some of the challenges in a small organization can be that sometimes you're put in a box. You're very much kind of, you're this person, you were recruited at this level, and therefore mentally you're kind of always that person in a small organization. On the flip side, though, there's less people to have to battle your ideas through, and it can be easier, and the relationships can be easier to kind of manage. However, in big organizations, it's very much depends on the size of the team that you're in. And the type of team that you're in as well, because I've worked in organizations where they're massive organizations, but and culturally the bulk of it might not necessarily be massively psychologically safe, but there's been silos within there and small teams where they've had fantastic managers, where that team has had a completely different experience to people working in other parts of the organization. So I think the key is it's very much not around brilliant. It's that, you know, no matter what size your business is, where you are, it depends on the individuals that are running those teams. Brilliant. Showing that it's safe to try new things, safe to fail, someone to help you break through. Silos can cause ideas and get trapped. They can just, and it's just around as individuals, we can all be responsible for kind of encouraging other people to share, other people to ask questions, whether you're in a leadership role or not. But it's very much around, I'm going to give you the example of Pixar. Anybody kind of come across Pixar? We all know who Pixar is, and anybody who's ever been a child or had a child since 2000 knows who Pixar is. And what's phenomenal about Pixar is that they are... they have I've got my detail, 3 things. They have 3 operating principles. Everyone must have the freedom to communicate with anyone else. It must be safe for everyone to offer ideas, and they stay close to innovations happening in the academic community, because they want to share all of the ideas and all of the creativity that is being driven by pioneers that are actually in academia. And the heart of their success is very, very much around their collaboration. They have something called the Brain Trust. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the Brain Trust. And this came out of, they were really, really struggling with, I believe it was Toy Story 2. They were really struggling with getting that story right. And what they did is they brought together, and it's a flexible group of people, but they meet every month or so, and they review all of the works in progress. And they watch the early runs, and they then go for lunch, and they will sit down and they will give feedback to the director and the producer of that movie and the story team of that movie. And it's truly honest feedback. And they identify what's wrong, missing, unclear, or makes no sense in that story, which sounds terrifying because creatives don't like to get negative feedback about their stuff. But what they do is it's not called negative feedback. What they're doing is it's coming from a place of empathy, and they have 3 rules around that feedback. And the first one is that they use candor, in that the feedback is frank and forthright. That comments are suggestions, not prescriptions. They are not telling anyone this is what you will do. What they are doing is saying, these are our suggestions, these are ideas based on the fact that this didn't flow, we didn't understand that, maybe this, you know, that kind of thing. And that feedback comes from empathy. It is not a gotcha. It is not about catching people out, but it's about creating the very, very best results that they can for a team. And part of how it works is because people come in and out of that brain trust group. So you can be on either end of that. So you are not going to be that person that deals out that really brutal feedback, knowing that at some point somebody could be coming back and doing that for you. So those meetings have to be really, really well led. They dole out the praise in massive, massive lumps. It is very much about making those people feel good about what they've achieved so far. And when they're having those conversations, somebody is responsible for leading that and making sure that they stick with those 3 principles as well. And the results of that for Pixar as a group is that they have around a $770 million annual revenue. It's not far off. I don't understand billions, but I think it's close to $1 billion. Oh, brilliant. So you do cover Pixar. Yeah, it's an amazing story, isn't it? You'll probably know much more about the actual details than I do, Gwyn, but it is just, it's fun. And for me, it just embraces everything that psychological safety is about and brings in that innovation. And because that freedom to speak, to share, to fail, to be told when things aren't working, and for it not to feel like a judgment, for you to then, because you don't want to crush someone's creative spirit. What you want to do is make sure that everybody has that freedom to share their ideas, because I've lost my quote. My quote is David Ogilvy, quite important in your industry, I believe. So he was saying that two quotes, big ideas come from the unconscious. So they're really, really deep down. We have to, so it's all about asking questions to bring that out. And also, the more of those ideas you share, the more likelihood there is of that actually becoming something concrete. And also, talent is more likely to be found among the non-conformers, dissenters, and rebels, which goes straight back to that Matthew Syed diagram there, in that you're bringing in those people because the more different viewpoints you get and the more safe they feel to be able to share, the more likelihood you are of getting that creativity and that innovation. So right, we are, gosh, honestly, I don't know where the time goes. I could talk for hours about this. What I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms just for sort of 5 minutes or so, and what that will do, if you can't speak, if you're in an environment where you can't talk at the moment, please don't leave. Please stay in that breakout room and just engage on the chat. Just sort of what I'd like you to talk about is, based on what we've talked about so far, what do you think you could do to improve those levels of psychological safety in your organization? Because talking about this is great, it's one thing, but actually thinking about what you could actually do when you go back to the office, how you could move forward with this. So even if you can't kind of chat because you're in an office or what have you, just use the chat box and share some ideas, because that's where you get the best ideas. You all work in this industry, you know what sectors they are, what the challenges are, but please do engage if you could. That would be fantastic. So for Irina, if you could pop people into those groups, that would be great. Charlie and Sarah, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, it would be feel free. My contact details are on the slide. If anybody wants to contact me, if you have to leave, that's fine. But yeah, pop you into those groups, and hopefully then we'll get some great ideas amongst you. I think if we've got everybody back, fantastic, brilliant. So what would be great, because we're saving the chat from here. What would be great would be if could you just, if you had any great ideas or anything that came out that was a theme or anything, if you could just drop those in the chat for me, that would be great, because it's always that practicalities, the things that you can do beyond these sessions that actually have the most value. So if you could drop those in the chat for me, that would be amazing. And then just oh yeah, receiving feedback, that is massive, isn't it? I've spent years talking about feedback, and I recently started reading, there's a book called Thanks for the Feedback. I can't remember who it's by, but it's in my shelf there, and it's a really good book, because not everybody can take it in the spirit in which it's meant. Brilliant. Yeah, building the foundations, educating on it, absolutely. Yeah, it's not negative, it's always just data. Feedback is just data. Yeah, the Pixar's brilliant. Opportunity to own projects, become experts. Yeah, people permission to be honest, absolutely. Yeah, make it better, make it even better. Yeah, that's it. I've got I work with some people where they do the what was great and what would be even better if, and that's I think one of the key things as well. But yeah, that permission to be honest, and when they are honest, not to respond emotionally to that honesty, as that can be a great. So fantastic, some brilliant ideas. And as I say, we'll be saving the chat. I'm going to talk about French cats there. Don't know. So, okay, so just some ideas there. So to improve psychological safety, some other things. I'm sure you've already come up with these different ideas. Leading by example, modeling the behaviours that you want to see. So showing all those different levels of safety as well. And you've already talked about these, encouraging open communication, providing feedback. You're celebrating the successes as well. When somebody, especially when people are newer and more junior, those little successes, it's really important that they're really made a big thing out of. And encouraging experimentation. Failing is not a failure. It's just learn. And if you have that around that culture of learning, that every failure is about learning how to do it differently, establishing clear expectations, making sure that everybody knows exactly what's expected of them. Because one of the biggest challenges, one of my other hobby horses, is managing expectations. I have a whole thing about that. And then providing that support to make sure that people know that they've got that support and that comfort behind them. And then as well, in terms of how and when it can go wrong. So some of the challenges, focus only on the positive. Psychological safety isn't only thinking about the positives. It doesn't actually mean that you don't give feedback. It's just how you give feedback. It's about making sure that if you commit to doing something, that you do follow through on that commitment. If you get toxic behaviors that are undermining other people's psychological safety, making sure that they're addressed, making sure that collaboration is thoroughly embraced for people as well, and putting that support in place, and then being vulnerable as well, because when we're vulnerable, what we're showing is that we will accept that feedback. We do recognize that we are not always right. All of the very best leaders are the ones who actually will admit when they don't know, when they've made mistakes, when things go wrong. And again, it's a real focus around making sure that these areas are identified and spotted and watched. And just to kind of wrap up finally, psychological safety is not just being nice. Doesn't mean that there's no consequences for mistakes. It isn't only important in certain teams. It doesn't matter what your team is. Everybody needs to be made psychologically safe. It isn't always easy to achieve. And it isn't the same as trust. Trust is a part of it, but that's not all that it is. Trust is a foundation for it. And as I say, I'm happy to have a half-hour chat. I can prop my I'll make sure Gwen's got my calendar link, and I'm happy to have a half-hour chat with anybody who wants to talk about any of this in any more detail, because I am massively passionate about this subject, as you can probably tell. But please do feel free to contact me. But yeah, psychological safety is the absolute foundation of what will create the environment for your teams to be as innovative and as so any final, I've got 2 minutes, Gwen, any final questions before I hand over to Gwen?
While we just see if anybody's got any questions, though I think most people are just very grateful. Thank you very much, Helen. Just want to say what's coming up on the training forum. So we've got our live event in December, where we're going to be talking about employee resource groups, or better known as communities, and how these are an incredibly good way of helping your CPD. So please come to our live event and share a very nice lunch with us afterwards to celebrate your work. And then in January, we're going to be doing burnout. Then in February, we're going to be doing Gen Z and recruitment. And in March, we're going to be doing teamwork through the eyes of Fleetwood Mac. Yes, you hear here first.
So, I come to that one.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, you can come, Helen. So we'll make sure that this recording is shared with everyone. We'll put more in the newsletter. We'll put how to get in touch with Helen in the newsletter. And please do stay with us for future training forums. And we will very much look forward to seeing everyone. And thank you so much, Helen. I think you'll have gathered from all the thank yous that people have found this very helpful. If anyone wants to stick around and just talk to Helen, then Irina and I are going to stay on the line with Helen, just in case anybody wants to ask a question one-to-one, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, I'll just say ta-ta to you all now. And
yes, thank you all for your engagement.